The current legislation that's going through Westminster Parliament, I think it's a good thing for a small minority of people who will benefit from it. Unfortunately, it lets down the majority of people who travel from Scotland, Wales and England to Switzerland, as they won't qualify for assisted death under this current restricted law. The minority of people that it covers, I'm happy for.
Yeah.
But the majority of people who go from England, never mind anywhere else worldwide, sorry, we'll say the UK, because I don't like using that term, but should we say England, Wales and Scotland?
Yeah.
People who travel from there to Switzerland, the majority of people that go won't be covered by it. How can you justify 6 months of suffering but as unacceptable, but not years and years, which people like my mum and dad went through and I could go through, you know? So well, Swiss law, it's the Right to Die with Dignity UK, the Facebook page that I set up.
Yeah.
That's similar to Switzerland and Canada, and that's on the basis that, you know, if you've got some form, well, you've got to be the age of reason,
yeah,
which is 18 now, isn't it? It has been for a long time. That you need to have some form of illness or condition that has a permanent and detrimental impact on your quality of life.
Yeah.
Then you should qualify for an assisted death.
Yeah.
So the issues: age, capacity, a condition that's neither treatable or curable. It's having experienced what could happen with that diagnosis. I was in a privileged financial position to successfully apply to Life Circle, which is an assisted dying centre in Switzerland, for an assisted death at the time and choosing at my time of choosing. The fact that having successfully got the assisted dying place has lengthened the quality of my life. You can at least get that one if you can, please. I think that's an important point. And I think in many senses, 6 months to live with a terminal illness tends to be cancer, which I wouldn't want, nor would I wish suffering on anybody that's living that way. But people can suffer for years and years from degenerative neurological disorders, for example, Parkinson's, and any form of dementia, locked-in syndrome, MS. You just carry on and carry on. And I could never figure out in my mind how people could support people not suffering for 6 months, which I get, I understand they shouldn't be suffering for 6 months, but people who suffer for years and years. My father was a supremely fit man. Unfortunately, for the last 5 years of his life, he contracted MSA-related dementia. And I've been pulled up for using this word, but I'm going to still use it. He was tortured by it. And the reason I say tortured was it was pain inflicted on him by a condition that wasn't treatable or curable. So the dementia wasn't treatable or curable. But the very fact that he wasn't, as he wished to do, allowed to have an assisted death, I considered the government were torturing him. He was having pain inflicted on him against his will, which needn't have been. So he really struggled with that. A horrible experience for him and heartbreaking for those around him. My mother was sent home from hospital with 8 weeks to live, and for a variety of reasons she contracted vascular dementia, and she lay in a bed screaming in pain for 4 years before she died. So neither of my parents would have qualified under this recent legislation. That's just a small example of it. I was diagnosed and still live with the diagnosis of Alzheimer's in 2015, and I wouldn't qualify under that legislation. Now, there's something that's also unique about those. So we've got MSA-related dementia, vascular dementia, and Alzheimer's. And the interesting thing about that is that I could suffer for many, many years. I have no idea of what's going on. I have no quality of life whatsoever. By the time we get to 6 months to live, neither of my mum or dad would have had capacity when they had 6 months left to live nor would I. Therefore, you would never, ever qualify because you couldn't have an assisted death when you got 6 months to live. I think it's discriminatory.
Yeah.
I think it's unacceptable. And I don't think it takes into consideration the suffering of the majority of people. Mental health, it's a word. I'm not keen on that word mental health because it conjures up all kinds of things and all kinds of conditions. And currently, I think when people refer to mental health, they're talking about depression. And it's a real ball of contention, even amongst people who support assisted dying, because of a lot of the myth that surrounds depression. And I've spoken to people, educated people, people who should be able to understand this, but they can't understand that if you live with depression, you can still have capacity. There are moments when, people say, well, they're just suicidal because they're depressed. And my experience, because I've helped a number of people recently apply for assisted deaths who the sole condition is depression in Switzerland. But I always try to explain to it from my personal experience, when people are in the throes of depression, they're that bad that suicide or death is the last thing from the mind. It just doesn't come into the mind. And it's only when they're having periods of reasonable happiness, etc., and they are able to make an informed choice, that they consider suicide or an assisted death on the premise of they don't want to go back in that place because they knew it was a horrible place to be. There's no correlation between depression and being able to make an informed choice, but people seem to draw that together. And they also start classing people, I hear people say, well, what about autistic people? I say, well, it's not a mental health issue. What about psychopaths? I said, well, that's not a mental health issue either, and they kind of get sucked into the myth of what mental health is, which is really disturbing.
Yeah.
But I do support the rights of anybody living with depression, providing they got capacity at the time that they apply and have an assisted death, to go ahead with that. And that's why the Right to Die with Dignity UK, the organisation that I'm part of, we've never actually mentioned conditions. Why should conditions come into it when we've got that, that clear criteria set out that age of consent, have capacity at the time of applying and received an assisted death, because they've got any condition or illness that has a severe and long-lasting impact on their quality of life. Why would you need to mention conditions and illnesses? If the time comes when I have to go for an assisted death, if the Alzheimer's does present itself in such a way, I'd have to go to Switzerland because I wouldn't qualify in the UK. I would not qualify. Like I said, by the time I've got 6 months to live, the general run of the mill with any form of dementia is you've not got capacity by that stage. I'm going to stick my neck out and say, I'd be dead confident, and I think I'm making an underestimate, if I was to say that 98% of the people who go to Switzerland would not qualify, if not more, would not qualify under the present legislation. I suppose there's two arguments. One argument, and the strongest argument, is for those people with the 6 month, they stop suffering and they've got choice. Another argument would be that, well, at least there's some legislation on the books now, and that's open to change. But Dignity in Dying said a long time ago that they would have, Sarah Hawtin, the CEO, whatever she calls herself, of that organisation, she said publicly that they wouldn't support any changes and they would oppose any changes to that legislation. In Canada, they had the full rounded out model, but when it comes to the vote in their parliament, there was like that, whether it passed or not, and a very restricted one, not as restricted as the one in the UK, was implemented. And a woman took out a case of disability discrimination, a breach of the Constitution. It's a problem, we've not got a Constitution, so that's an issue over here. But she took out a case that it was against disabilities, it was disability discrimination. The courts upheld it, and then the system that they've now got, which is what they wanted in the first place, was introduced. Because that's what I used to always argue. Why are we trying to bring in a piece of statute that's already been established in Canada? This parliamentary system and legal system is not vastly different 2 hours, have deemed it discriminatory. And especially, women tend to live longer. Women are more likely than to pick up some form of disability as they age. Unfortunately, statistically, I think women suffer more from depression than males do, although that's because it's not declared or not, I don't know. But, we've got disability and possibly sex discrimination involved in that. It's, I just can't get it. So because we've not got a constitution, is it viable and possible for groups like My Death, My Decision and Humanist UK to look at the possibility of challenging it under disability discrimination? Okay, so I was born into an Italian-Irish family, and looking at me, it's strange to say, but we were subject to discrimination right from a very, very early age. It was when I became aware of assisted dying. I said people were suffering years and years ago. People were suffering, and I saw that as an equality issue or a discriminatory issue, because if you've got money, like everything else, you can afford to go to Switzerland, but the majority of the people in this country who are most socially and economically deprived can't afford it. I'm in a privileged position. I'd got enough money to I'd put away to one side and pay for it if needed. One of the problems with this latest bill is there was a lot of discussion around palliative care. And the reason it was around palliative care because it was about the last 6 months of life. Now, there's no treatment for the majority of degenerative conditions, and by the time it comes to palliative care, all your suffering's been done. There's no treatment, there's no cure. If a person wants to choose to come out of that and have a peaceful, humane, dignified death, why shouldn't they? Why shouldn't they? It's taking that slogan from the women's movement of the 70s. It's my body.